about you, but it feels like buying a home as a millennial is almost impossible. So in this video, I'm going to walk you through a couple different things to think on if you are dedicated to purchasing a home as a millennial and you're trying to figure out how the heck you can do it in this seemingly impossible market we're in. As a millennial, we've got to start thinking about purchasing property differently than our grandparents and parents did. Back in the day, they could walk into the house that they wanted, be there for 50 years and it still worked for their lifestyle. And unfortunately, we're just not in that type of market anymore, at least in Washington state. And so if you're trying to figure out what that looks like for you, we've got a couple of different things that we've got to be really, really smart with and targeted with in order to actually get you into the dream of homeownership. So the first suggestion that I have for you is picking your top 3 items in order to figure out exactly what you want in a home. When you are trying to pick your first home, understand this is not likely going to be the dream home. This is likely going to be a stepping stone home that you're going to live in for 2 to 3 years. So you're going to pick those 3 items that you absolutely have to move into this home that is going to get you out of a rental, get you into home ownership, and start the progress towards the home that you really want to be on. In my first home, we lived in Auburn, Washington, and what I found for my 3 was I wanted something that had minimal work to do. I wanted to be relatively close to everything I needed, and Auburn in that case worked for us. And I wanted something that had basically enough yard that my dog could run around, but not so much yard I actually had to clean it up too much. And those were my top 3. And luckily, we found something that did match all 3 and had a little bit more. But it was not to be expected, and I really expected to walk into something that was going to be pretty small. The biggest trap that I see people fall into is when they start having a really, really long list. And it can be really challenging, especially if you've rented for a long time, to start having that list grow longer and longer and longer. And then you're gonna find yourself in this trap of continuing to rent, never finding a home, and never getting to the dream home. So I would just encourage you to pick as minimal number as possible, get that mindset around the idea that you are gonna be in this home for a very short amount of time, really just to build enough equity to launch yourself into the next property. The other thing that I highly recommend is starting early. And I'm not talking about starting 4 months early. I'm really not even talking about starting 6 months early. I'm talking about starting a year or more before you're actually wanting to make your move. Oftentimes I'm finding that I'm starting to work with clients as soon as they sign a 1-year lease. We are starting the process of looking at what the market's going to be like and looking at homes for them from that date. The reason why it's taking that long is because we've got to adjust the expectations that you probably have around what you can find and start seeing properties in a different way. You're going to see these properties in a way that is, what can I live with right now for a temporary amount of time that is going to work for me? And keeping in mind, what is going to keep building equity so that I can get where I want to go? So that process takes a little bit longer to research, and I highly recommend doing that together. You can certainly do it on your own. By no means do you need a realtor to do that with, but I do find that it's really nice to start working in tandem early so that you have really an expectation and a really strong relationship with the realtor that you're going to ultimately work with. I want to debunk a myth that so many people talk about all the time, and that's having 20% down. You do not need 20% down to purchase a home. And I know that your uncle and your parents and grandparents probably talk about how important it is to have that amount down, but I want to let you know that there are so many different ways that you're able to get that mortgage insurance off your loan and still have the house that you want and the payments that you want without having 20% down. So I want to nick that right away. You do not need 20% down. In fact, most people I'm seeing somewhere between 3 and 5% down on their first home, oftentimes even using down payment programs, meaning they have no down, as long as they have a safety net in the bank where you're not going to run into major issues if something does go wrong in the house, then you are a-okay to purchase. In fact, we are in a market where I've seen a lot of people purchase with literally 0 out of pocket, and as long as everything else checks out on your financials, that is something that you could potentially do too. If you have questions on how to do that in Washington state, leave me a message because I can definitely help you with that. A trap that I see people fall into when they're trying to purchase their first home is searching for a specific feature that they think is a must-have that's really not. Let me tell you what I mean by that. So one example I have for people oftentimes is looking at the difference between a single family home and a condo. And the reason why this happens is because most likely you're renting a single family home, which means you've got a yard, you have no walls to share, and the thought of moving into a condo, which basically feels like an apartment, can be so bizarre that it's not even considered. But the reason why that could be a huge benefit for you is because of one, the price point, two, you're gonna have almost no maintenance at all, and three, it is going to build you equity so quickly that you can launch yourself into the single family home that you may not have otherwise been able to afford before. So when we are looking at condos, the question of pets oftentimes becomes the issue. So if you have dogs, it can be challenging. And yes, there are ways that we can find condos or townhomes that accommodate for animals for the most part. There's always going to be a few that are not accommodated. So that's just something we're going to have a conversation about, or you would have to do some research on if you're not in Washington State to figure out if the condo is going to work for you or if it's maybe not going to work. All right, the other thing that you probably have heard of before is looking at properties that maybe need some minor work to them. That could mean replacing flooring, it could be a quick paint, or it could be an outdated kitchen. And if you have any of those items, those are gonna be the properties that a seller is much more likely to work with you on, negotiate with you, and actually get you into the home without having to pay an arm and a leg for the updates already being there. And I know that can be often challenging because you want a home that's like really pretty and beautiful to move into and you don't have to lift a finger, but it's just not the market we're in for the most part. So if you're in that position where you're looking at homes that maybe aren't as nice or maybe need some work, and I'm not talking about major fixes, I'm just talking about more cosmetics. If that is something you're running into, one of the things that I do for my clients is put together design boards. And so if you're trying to figure out like, how could I make this work with a remodel, or how could I make this work with maybe an extensive project, those are things that I will often work with my buyer clients on to help them figure out and see the vision of what a property could be without the expectation that you're going to spend an arm and a leg to get into that. You also have the option of having a rehab loan, which could be potentially used in those instances and get you the updates that you want right away before you even move in. And then lining up your rental and your new home is another question that I get a lot, and that is actually much easier than you might expect. So with your rental, you typically have to give like a 30-day notice and then you are out of there, right? And with a property, you typically have an end date that you know you're going to move in. Now, instead of lining up these two dates exactly the same, I would not recommend doing that. Instead, keep in mind that when you purchase a home, you actually do not make a payment for almost 2 months. So it's going to be the first of the following month. So if you closed in October, you wouldn't have a first payment until December 1st. That actually saves you potentially a monthly payment and gives you the time to make your transition, your move, without having a rental payment and a mortgage payment. Keep that in mind if you're trying to figure out timelines as well. I'm Larissa Butler. I specialize with first-time home buyers, and I myself am a millennial. I work really hard to make sure my clients are still able to get the home they want. And yes, we are selling homes to millennials all the time, and no, they are not going broke. And if you want a guide on how to make your move as a first-time home buyer, I have a link in the downloads below for you to check that out with no pressure at all from me. Gives you the opportunity to look through some more tips on what you're gonna need in order to make your transition. Or if you're in Washington State and you wanna work with me, feel free to hop on my calendar and I'd love to connect.